You have to open up the chat box. You'll be able to see some stuff.
Good morning. Welcome to our first Zoom meeting. I only see, what, 8, 9, 10, 11 boxes. I don't know whether we have other people not on video. Try the chat box, see. Well, I have no idea how many are attending. Okay. What do I have to talk about? You know, I've been in spirituality for going on 50 years. My experiences have been different from Robert's, been different from Nisargadatta's, been different from Ramana's, been different from Ramakrishna's and just about everybody else. So I have a different point of view based on my own experiences, my own understanding, my own reading. And I doubt whether many of you have more than 5 or 10 years of experience and whether you really have any idea of where you're going or what purpose has been served by where you have been, the causal connection of where you are now and what you're thinking. But to me, spirituality is not something to be learned mentally. What is exposed is increasing levels of understanding yourself directly as consciousness, as you let go of ideas, which means not just about spirituality, but about the ideas that are inbred in you about everyday life. And this is not easy, because until perhaps 4 or 5 years before looking at this satsang here, maybe more, you believed a tale that's not true. You believe that you're an individual human being immersed in an immense world of which you are a small and vulnerable part, subject to birth and death, subject to illness, subject to pain and vulnerability. But there's a different tale told by Robert and Nisargadatta and Ramana and Ramakrishna and many others, which is that it has nothing to do with the body. Somebody's mic is on, so we're getting feedback. Can you mute your mic right now? Because I'm hearing myself talk through your mics. HTC, can you mute your mic? HTC, can you mute your mic? Let's see if that works. Good. Okay, so the tale they tell is best told by Ramana when he felt he was dying, and rather than fearing the death experience, he allowed himself in his imagination to die, and found out when he went deep inside of himself to find out who was dying, found nothing there except spirit, except consciousness. And he came to the conclusion that although the body died, who he was, spirit, did not die. That spirit was immortal. Let's take a different view of this, and instead of using the word spirit, use the word consciousness. He thought consciousness was immortal, and that matter, the body, was not mortal, was not immortal. It was just a passing thing, an experience within consciousness which was immortal. But that was his point of view. Nisargadatta altered that and said, even consciousness is mortal, is transient, is an appearance to us who lies beyond consciousness. So, not only is the body mortal and not us, but consciousness is mortal and not us. We are the absolute. Now, there are not many teachers that teach like this. There are not many teachers that say awakening is not a one-shot process to one end, which is the absolute or realization of God, but there are stages. There are actually many, many stages, but the two most significant stages, at least for me and for Bernadette Roberts, was first of all realization of yourself as God or as the God within you. Then the second is living in that stage of unity with God, unity with consciousness, unity with the world for a long period of time. Sindri, I think your microphone is on. Or Sanzo. So for a long period of time, you live in the delightful world of being one with the divine, or at least in the ability to worship the divine as the other. This is a place of love. This is a place of bliss. This is the place of feeling yourself as energies. This is the way of experiencing yourself as unity with the visible world. This can go on for years. Ramakrishna refused to give up this place to go the next step to the absolute because he just wanted to be with his Kali as the other to worship. And he is the student. So you can spend many years in this place of enlightenment, of awakening, of your unity with God, feeling the consciousness within as yourself, feeling the life force within that's motivating the body and motivating you to talk and motivating you to do anything, feeling the energies within permeating your whole body, feeling the consciousness within and around you everywhere as your sense of presence, your sense of existence, feeling love constantly for one's own self and for the others, feeling love for consciousness, feeling love for animals, feeling love for your beloved, feeling love for God within you. And then feeling bliss. Bliss that arises from below the heart, enters the heart and stays there. Your whole mind sinks into the heart and there is immersed constantly in bliss. The rapture of complete bliss and union with God, which is union with your own self, your own heart of hearts. And for most in the whole world, they will never attain this. They will live like ordinary human beings, caught in the dream of life as a human being within a larger world and environment. While you know yourself as consciousness, you know yourself as joined with God in your heart. This is one form of awakening to the manifest self, the totality of manifest consciousness, being alive in the entirety of manifest consciousness. And Jan Essman talks about this, Sahaja Samadhi. And when you're in this place, you can awaken others. You can awaken the bliss in others. You can touch others. Your love will touch others. Your feeling, your own sense of presence can be communicated to others, and they will feel you. They will recognize in you that same sense of presence in themselves, and will thus awaken to the totality of consciousness. And for most, this is good enough. However, Bernadette Roberts talks about going beyond this. Not by choice, but by the fact it was taken away from her, this unity vision, this unity consciousness. Step by step, nothingness pervaded and stole her joy of being in union with Christ, with God. Stole her bliss, stole her energies, leaving a black hole at the center, which she, among others, called the calamity. But it's really the void, which is a deeper level of self than the manifest consciousness, although they are connected. Gradually, you leave hold or let go of the bliss of consciousness, of the delights thereof, of love, surrender, obedience, because nothingness is becoming more manifest in your life. And in that nothingness, everything that is experienced is just an appearance projected onto that nothingness. Now, I knew the nothingness first because I started in Zen. And the Zen emphasis is on nothingness, on the void. They don't take to the emotional aspect of the divine. There is no divine in Buddhism. There is no love in Buddhism. There's just release in Buddhism. Release from the ties of love. Release from the ties of bonding. Release from the ties of being a human being and slipping into nirvana, which is escaping all the bonds of the flesh and of experience, which for many is a step too far. If they go there without having first lived in Christ consciousness, lived in harmony with God within, with that life force within, with that love within, it's a very dry place. But if you have had that realization of the manifest self, of the manifest consciousness of God within, you take that with you into the void. You take that feeling of comfort. You take that feeling of complete rest within God with you into the void. And it's an easy passage. It's an easy passage into the place of complete, what do we call it? Independence, of needing nothing, needing no one, not even God. And from this place to be able to watch the totality of consciousness as if it were a ball in front of you, and you standing behind it, you can watch it, you can touch it, you can probe it. But you as such are untouched by the vagaries and the plights and the joys of consciousness. You've gone on to the next level of witnessing that although this consciousness comes to you, it is not you. But without this consciousness, you would not know that you existed. This consciousness is your tool, your telescope to observe existence. It's an intermediary between you and the world as consciousness. And the world may not even exist. It may just be an appearance in consciousness. But you'll never know. All that you can know is either nothingness or consciousness. And everything within consciousness is open to interpretation, whether there is a real external world or not. Now, I've told this part hundreds and hundreds of times. What I'd like to do is, in detail, talk about the various kinds of self-inquiries that lead to the different kinds of awakenings. Now, Robert follows Ramana, although Ramana changes his point of view, and so does Robert when it comes to practicing self-inquiry. But the one Robert most frequently talked about, and which Ramana also talked about, is to begin watching your mind. Watching is the word. You do it with your head, with your vision, the third eye. You watch your mind. You watch the thoughts. You sort of step back or step down and below and watch your thinking. You watch where thoughts arise and where they pass away. So that when you first see a thought coming, you seize that thought and see what it is. And maybe at that point you watch it and you hold on to it till it disappears, and you watch where it disappears. Now, as you develop poise and discipline doing this particular exercise, you start discriminating between the thoughts until you can find the I thought. So that becomes the single thought in the whole field of thinking, your I thought. And while you're holding on to the I thought, you let go of it. And then out of the corner of your vision, so to speak, because you don't want to hold on to it directly anymore, because that will just freeze it in place or make it disappear without seeing where it goes. You just sort of relax and let the I thought come and go. And follow it where it goes. And you'll see it goes into nothingness. It's like those science fiction movies where you're watching a rocket ship go away from you, or that body floating in space going away from you until it becomes so infinitesimally small it disappears. Such will happen to you with the I thought. You will see emptiness as a darkness. You will see the I thought receding backwards into the emptiness until it disappears into the emptiness, and the only thing you can see is that dark emptiness. It's not completely dark because it's lit by the light of consciousness, but it's darker than if you opened your eyes and looked around the world without. So, through this method, you get to know the vastness of the emptiness within, the imaginal emptiness within. And after a while, that emptiness can be everywhere. And like I did one day in the shower, when looking within while taking a shower, I looked inwards for the I that was experiencing the water falling on my flesh. I was feeling delightfully happy for 3 days prior to the shower. Happier and happier and happier. And I got in the shower for the 10,000th or 100,000th time. I looked within for the I that was perceiving the experience of water falling on my flesh, the flesh of this body, and I saw nothing. And when I saw nothing, that there was no I became nothingness itself. When you become nothingness itself, there is no longer an I. And if there's no longer an I, there's no longer a thou in opposition to it. So there is no longer an inner I versus the external thou. And the boundary between you and the world disappears, and there's only one consciousness without a flesh or a skin border that differentiates between internal and external. Well, this scared the shit out of me because I felt that there was nobody there watching the store anymore. Who's going to watch over this body? There was no who. There was just emptiness. This went on for a long, long time, reoriented to a different state of existence where words meant nothing. Concepts were only little clouds floating in your field of consciousness. And only when they were absorbed in the brain was an object in the external world created. It was kind of frightening at times. At one time I called Robert and said, Robert, I'm scared I don't exist. Which is what he'd say all the time at the beginning of Satsang. You don't exist. You don't prevail. You are nothing. And that's what my experience was. I was nothing. And Robert said, of course you're something. You're speaking to me, aren't you? Which brought me back into being a person. So you can have a split point of view. You as a person and you as nothingness. And thus I drifted between those two for 14 or 15 years after Robert died. I had realized the absolute, the nothingness that contained everything and to which everything eventually came out of or eventually returned to. Thus I understood Buddhism and the Heart Sutra that said, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Feeling, thought, and consciousness are also like this. All things are born out of emptiness and all things return to emptiness. And you can take either point of view of being all things or of being nothing, being the void. That was the result of watching the I thought, watching it arise and disappear, going into the nothingness state, going into the recognition of yourself as form and emptiness, the Buddhist realization. And for 14 or 15 years, I thus drifted until I fell in love with a woman, with a student. And I've never felt such love in my life, such strong love. And she was able to speak of such strong love and commitment and abidance. And thus we mutually communicated for 3 or 4 years. More and more intense, more and more devotional, and with it came all kinds of experiences of the opening of the heart, our hearts, an ability to communicate telepathically, whether that was in the imagination or was real. The ability to perceive energy's movement within the body as currents and as colored currents, moving up the spine, down the spine, around inside, mostly counterclockwise, feeling the energy within, the chi, the shakti. Feeling the shakti move out from the heart, outwards into the world, gradually growing into a sense of presence, a sense of existence, of a subtle body within that permeated the physical body without. And inside was lighted with the light of consciousness and was thoroughly empty, and yet extended beyond the body as a sense of presence, so that I could say with my full heart, I have come alive. I exist, I am. The I am did not pertain to the body. The I am, the sense of existence, pertained to that sense of presence that was awakened through being in love and being loved. I knew finally totally what it was like to be totally loved by another, which is needed by all people to release themselves from the flesh, to have that feeling of being fully accepted and totally loved for who and what they are, on a physical level and on a spiritual level. Without feeling that full sense of love, it's very hard to escape the flesh. It's very hard to escape the spirit, because there's a deep longing, unfulfilled, whether you're aware of it or not. So feeling completely loved and accepted is really important. And that's what happened to me in 2010, which then allowed me eventually to release myself from that clinging, that desperate love for the other, and while that other desperately loved me, and the amount unbelievable experiences of being loved and of the perception of God, the perception of the golden light of forgiveness falling on one, of grace from the divine within, and of seeing and feeling and experiencing the divine within as another entity, as God, him or herself within, as a white light that arises from the gut into the heart, into the head, and explodes beyond and eventually settles down into that sense of presence, so that you, in a sense, live in dynamic union with that sense of presence, with the divine within. I can't tell you how great this experience is, of constantly feeling the divine within, of knowing that you're the source of the universe, that you are the same as God. In a sense, you have created all of consciousness, or at least all of the entities that fill consciousness, all of the appearances within consciousness. And thus it goes on for a couple or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 15 years, living in this unity consciousness. That's what Bernadette Roberts calls it, unity consciousness with Christ, Christ consciousness. The awareness of oneself as God, or a human incarnated. God incarnated as a human in your body and in your sense of presence. And the bliss continues for years. Sometimes strong, sometimes subtle, sometimes changing, sometimes remaining relatively constant. Now, the self-inquiry that would lead to this kind of experience, instead of looking at the mind and trying to find where the I thought arises and disappears, of just watching thinking, is very different. Instead of looking for the I thought, one feels inside your chest area for the sense that I am, the sense that I exist, which is preparatory to the experience of a sense of presence that exists in you and around you and everywhere. The first step is to feel within, usually by the heart, for the sense I am, the sense that I exist, that I am a perceiver, that I am alive. And once you feel that thought, not that thought, feel that feeling, you abide there as much as possible with the focus of your attention in the heart area. And beginning there, your consciousness, the center of gravity of your consciousness sinks away from the brain downwards into the heart. And when this happens, thoughts recede into the background because you're no longer right in the midst of the thoughts, you're below the thoughts into your heart, and you can look upwards into the brain, which keeps chattering and chattering and chattering. But it's like a conversation in 2 rooms away that you can ignore completely and instead concentrate on where you are with the joys of being in your heart, which is silent, which is a sense of peace, of rest in one's denser self. It feels denser than when you're in your head, which feels airy and visual like space. In here, it's more like being in a swimming pool of feeling. It's like being in fluid that is circulating and is gentle and cool. And from that heart, you can feel such love. You can start feeling love for yourself. You can start feeling love for others. And emotions will start arising once your consciousness is centered in your heart. Old things will arise. Sadness, joy, fear, emptiness, fullness, depression, anger. All these feelings can start to arise, but not necessarily. And you'll have to learn how to deal with them by being able to isolate a thought. For example, grief, which you've held at a distance, and learn how to slowly relax that distance. Watch it and sort of invite the feeling closer and closer. This could take a month for a strong feeling like anger or fear. It could take 2 months. To watch it closing in on you and then pushing away and not wanting to have anything to do with it until you realize that the only way around this is to actively invite it into your heart. You invite the depression. You allow it to come into your heart. And as it's coming into your heart, you accept it. And then you get to the place where it's in your heart. And you feel such rest there because it's finally in you and you're feeling it totally rather than holding it away. And after you've done that for however long it takes, 3 minutes, 3 days, it suddenly dissipates, suddenly. And you're left behind in a river of bliss. Such is it with all of the strong negative emotions. whether it be anger, especially fear, depression, loss, grief, hatred. All of these, one by one, have to be eaten and swallowed and incorporated into your sense of self. And each time you incorporate one of these strong emotions into yourself, the sense of self is strengthened. The sense of presence is made stronger. You become stronger. You become tougher. There's nothing that you fear, because fears have been transcended by being eaten and brought into your heart. And that they have been released, their energy, and you are just filled with the joy and bliss of having that negative emotion now absorbed into you through your openness. And it's this way that the feelings of love for another and for yourself begin to arise. It's like you have to do the job of feeling into your core and getting your center of awareness out of your head into your heart. And once it's in your heart, you begin to feel things you've never felt before or have been repressed for a long time before. And once you've been able to start dealing with those feelings and with the raw experience of your body from the inside, that you open yourself, as Nisargadatta said, to the I am sense, revealing the fullness of its experience to you as great love and as great bliss, something that will always be with you, that you can always carry with you. Even when you transcend it, it will still be available to you. That sense of presence, that sense of acceptance of everything as it is. It'll always be there for you, within you, even when you go beyond. And that's where I was when I met my beloved. And she and I went on fire, back and forth. This energy went back and forth. Heart opening more and more, surrender opening more and more. The literal seeing of God and the descent of grace and bowing to God's feet, wanting to be crushed by God, just to act as grease for his wheels of his existence. Total surrender, total love, total submission. And with that, total healing of all the human places that hadn't been healed. That's the process of self-inquiry to get to the awakening to the manifest self, to the divine within, which, as you can see, is different from awakening to the absolute, to emptiness, to nothingness. I would suggest that you do the feeling approach first, to waken up to self-love and to the unity consciousness, the consciousness of God and being one with God, of bliss, etc., before you do the other kind of going into the absolute. Then there's the third kind of self-abidance that Nisargadatta talks about and that Robert talks about, which is just being yourself. This is what you can do after the other realizations, the realizations of where the I thought comes and goes, where the mind comes and goes into nothingness or the emptiness or into the void, or becoming one with the divine through love and through self-acceptance within and dealing with emotions and feeling. The third and final self-abidance is just to be yourself. You've looked inwards for a long period of time at thoughts and feelings arising. You felt inwards for a long period of time and realized God this way. The last thing then to do is just to be yourself. No longer look within, no longer feel within, but instead to drop backwards into yourself. Just surrender and fall into yourself as you are right now, without picturing who or what you are. Just fall backwards towards your sense of self. And in silence, be yourself, which will consist of both the body and the mind and consciousness and feelings. All of this you fall backwards into. And with that falling backwards, after having first realized the manifest self and the absolute, allows you to leave all of that behind and just fall into yourself, whatever is there. And instead of realizing it, you become yourself. You become totally relaxed, totally unsearching, totally complete, totally at rest. And you fall into yourself, into silence. And that's the highest teaching, the highest method. But if you start with that, it's going to utterly fail you, because the mind will have too much power at first to be able to relax and just commit to being oneself, because it's always looking outside for support. It's always seeking, seeking, seeking. And you have to be beyond seeking before you can relax and just be yourself. I'll be back in a minute, and then you can turn on your microphones and start asking questions. Give me about 2 minutes. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? See, this is mostly teachers will give you rather simple instructions. And if they're good teachers, I mean, if they really realize themselves, what they'll do is lead you step by step rather than present the overview of what's happening. They'll work with you individually where you are at your spot in time and give you the directions necessary for you to move beyond that, rather than to give an overview. But I don't have that much contact with you except through my writings on the blog, through Satsang, and through email. Very few are in direct contact with me to be able to do that kind of stuff, like living in an ashram where you're with the teacher all the time, who can create conditions around you to help you overcome blockages or give you inspiration to help you out. So all I can do is talk about an overview so that you feel as if you know at least the overall process and how you fit in, even though you may not know where you are and where to start yourself. You may still be tossing and turning, not knowing which way to go because you don't know where you fit in to what I just outlined. But just assume that you know nothing. It's always best to assume that you're an absolute beginner. You don't know anything. And from that point of view, decide whether you want to practice self-inquiry, looking for the I thought or feeling for the I thought. And in that sense, make your own decision as to which is most appropriate for you, feeling within or looking within. Now, for those who have a difficult time in pursuing relationships, staying in relationships, the looking tends to be easier because it doesn't involve the messiness of the painful feelings that one can get from loss, betrayal, jealousy, love, and all of those kinds of things that are hard to deal with for many people. On the other hand, other people have jumpy minds and have a difficulty just watching the thoughts as they arise because feelings have more meaning for them. So they should do a feeling approach, a feeling within, not without, as to most people feel about something happening in the external world, some misjustice there, some love out there, something that makes you angry out there about the world. And instead of reacting to the world, you go within and feel your inner world, including your reactions to the external world. But you do it with the guidance of looking for the I am sensation, the sense that you are alive, so that eventually you can say, I have come alive. I am the absolute that has come alive to the flesh through the spirit. Are there any questions? Mark, you have one boiling? You got to turn your mic on.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, but barely. Speak up, please.
Yeah, my mic is bad. It's from a cam and
You're what? I can't hear you. I can't hear you. What?
my mic is part of a cam, so I'll do my best. I'm really surprised to hear you say time and again that Ramana was really talking about consciousness. He was really talking about consciousness and the bliss which can appear in consciousness. And I'm surprised to hear that, because what I understand from his teachings, and I'm really influenced by Michael James, I think he's a really eloquent philosopher. His method of self-inquiry, the scriptures, not the popular ones like talks and all that.
Don't get too complicated. Let's keep it simple.
Okay. What I got out of that is that he was always pointing to the absolute. Always. He was never talking about perception, and if perception was there, you ought to turn your attention around, as a matter of speaking, on the I thought, or sometimes he called it even the sense of I. And this really confuses me, because I'm in a deep crisis. I don't really know what is best for me. I think the feeling approach might be best, but then I wouldn't feel so safe, because since a young kid, I didn't feel safe. And so there is an intense attraction for me by just looking for the I thought and finding the absolute and being perfectly safe from consciousness and whatever happens in that. So I guess my question is, what to do, what to pick up?
Toss a quarter into the air. Call it heads or tails. Heads, emotion, tails, looking. Whatever it is, whatever lands, do that. And if you don't like the answer, toss the coin again. That was the advice given to me by one of my teachers, who suggested this for anybody within a dilemma. By just in your imagination practicing this, you'll know which one you want to do by your refusal or acceptance of the first toss. If I were you, I would do the feeling approach, because it's the most difficult. It's the most difficult for you, as having been primary focused on intelligence, understanding, and the mind. And instead, open yourself to the heart and whatever comes out. You can also practice externally. Do you have pets?
No, I don't.
By loving an animal as well as a person. Are you married or have a girlfriend? Well, see, this is a new way then for you to open yourself to the world, to the pain, to the suffering, to the danger. But I'll tell you, it will feel so good to feel the fear fully for the first time, and to have fear envelop you and make you crazy with fear until it becomes one with you. And you feel your whole heart jumping in joy because of the bliss you feel as to finally integrating all that fear in the background into your sense of self. The same with the fear of loss, or with direct loss, or the fear of loving and being abandoned, or of feeling great jealousy. All of these things are wonderful feelings to feel, even though they don't seem that way when they first appear. But fighting yourself through human feelings leads you with such strength and such power, almost unimaginable by the average yogi who does not touch these things.
Yeah. Well, I worked a lot with forgiveness, and
What?
I worked a lot with forgiveness. That's like immersing yourself in the emotions and then discovering the core thought which gives rise to these emotions. But part of that process is always feeling. So it's not that I'm scared or totally unfamiliar with that. I'm just a doubting guy. It's like I've worked for years with the Course in Miracles, and it was very good, but there's something missing. And that something is what I see in you. I just can't deny what I feel when I look at you and I hear your voice and I see your thought. I can't deny that. There's something it's so authentic and so real. So I have this message, I have to do something with that. So that's already clear. But, I'm still, yeah. But
I'll tell you, searching for the thoughts that set off the emotions is really the wrong way. It's trying to, in a sense, whitewash those thoughts and turn them into a mere reaction to thoughts, And that thought is the king of everything. And by changing your mind, you can change the feeling. And instead, just dive deep into the feeling without worrying about the thinking origin of those thoughts, because the thinking is way up here. The feeling is way down here. Sometimes the feelings are launched by the mind, but most often they are not. When you fall in love, it's a kind of visceral thing that grabs your whole body and just enraptures you in that other person. I'm talking about romantic love. It grabs you. It grabs you by your cock. It grabs you by your head. It grabs you by your heart. It grabs every part of you, and you fall desperately in love or desperately in attraction. And then you get so frightened of losing that person because you feel how wonderful it is to want something that much and to have your whole body awaken to romance and to sexuality. You don't want to lose that. And then you can get jealous when it appears that that other is paying some attention to somebody else rather than to you. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you go through when you fall in love and when you're susceptible to it, rather than to try to dive down into that thought link about that person and about loss and how the thought of loss is setting off the jealousy, and instead to just jump into that jealousy and swim with it.
It's a different approach.
Because it seems like you're entering a river of death, of being totally open to jealousy and to fear and so forth. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why the analytic approach, the what is that book of whatever it is? I don't like it because it doesn't allow you to fully experience, untethered and unvarnished and unprotected, all those feelings that are coming within you. And instead you try to analyze for the source and arrest it at the source.
Yeah. Well, it's a different philosophy. I think it is possible to get back to the causing thoughts, because everything in that philosophy, in that mythology or part, is comes from a thought. For example, if I have a certain feeling for a woman.
Stop thinking that way. I understand. You don't have to explain it.
Okay.
Because I'm saying that's the wrong approach to take for you.
I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. Okay.
Are there any other questions? Michael, do you have any questions about politics? Haven, Steve, Leopold, Angela, Serena, Cindria, any questions? Okay. We had a total of 14 people show up this week, which is half of what usually shows up. But I don't know whether people that don't have a microphone are listed anywhere, if there's somebody just observing. So we'll see. This will be posted later as a video, so you can see it over and over again. I don't know where yet. There'll be a link to its place in the cloud. So until next time, 11 o'clock, please don't show up too early because I get confused with all the... Every time somebody pokes on one of that Facebook link, it opens up this room, so that by the time satsang is ready to start, 10 people have done that independently, and we've got 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms open, and I can't find which room is live. So it's better to wait for me to open up like 1:45 or 10:30 and then join that one, rather than, I don't know how this is going to be ironed out, what we'll do. But there were so many boxes, it was hard to get started this morning to find out where the people were. And I'm sure some got locked out because they got confused since there were so many rooms open. So don't join until 10:30, please. And I'll see you next time, same place, and bring some questions, okay? Thank you much. I love you. I love you. I love you. Just hang in there. Hang in there. And keep practicing self-inquiry, self-love. Goodbye.